Okay, let's have a moment of prayer, if you would. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for your many blessings to us and for stirring up your power and with great might coming among us, with great power and great humility. And we are sorely hindered by our condition, our where we are in this world. So please, with your grace and mercy, help us, deliver us. Thank you for Esther, who risked the palace, and in very ambiguous times, you were able to make her stand, and you brought deliverance to your people. So we look to you and to your word this morning. Please walk among us this morning and teach us and help us with grateful hearts to speak your praise, to glorify you, and to be filled with wonder at your appearing. In Jesus' name, through him, we pray. Amen. Well, we are got a couple things, but I want something that I wanted to do that I think might be good to do, because in this study, like I say, I certainly want us to see the forest for the trees. And one thing I think might be good, and y'all can help me too, please, is let's sort of start to make a little list of the bare bones and outline of Esther. And I'll start with, we have, the setting, sort of like the who, what, when, where kind of thing. We certainly have a palace. And we have a king. We have Esther. Tell me a little bit about just a couple of things that you picked up about her. Just simple things.
Jewish Jew.
Okay, Jewish.
Orphan.
Beautiful. Great beauty. Put that there. Great beauty. She have any family? She is an orphan, but she has family.
She is uncle. Yeah.
Cousin?
Cousin.
I'm going to put Mordecai. Can't spell. On the run. Okay, we have Esther, Jewish orphan, great beauty, cousin Mordecai. She is, how does she come into the picture of this palace and king?
Consort.
More than that?
She became queen, didn't she? Or are we that far? She became one of his women.
Okay, we'll put in the term. She became queen.
What's the consort?
We're like, well, one of the harem.
Okay, it's a nice way of saying it.
Concubine.
Yeah, nice way to say concubine.
Queen. Circumstances.
She seems to be very kind.
Kind. That's very true. Is she outspoken? Is she what's going on with her up to this point?
She's pretty smart because
she's smart. She's smart. I'm gonna say this: she's quiet, and I will go even further to say she's hiding. She I want to say goes along, but there's a better way, I guess, of saying that. But I would say she's not bold.
She is, in a way, in the fact she's working a system.
Well, we haven't gotten there yet.
Oh.
We haven't gotten there yet. Let's leave it at that at this point. to give you just a little bit of where we are. Now, we've gone through a couple of chapters, and we're trying to go through somewhat quickly, but again, we need to bring out, and we're going to do more and more of that, but because there's a lot that we're going to be able to draw from this a little bit later on down the road when we get more of what happens in the story. But where we've gotten, and we began to see this last Sunday, is that around chapter 3, around this place, in our story, we find out about a plot that is hatched by a very powerful person who's risen to power. Esther's risen to power. And you know, she's risen there because of her great beauty, mainly. She was taken by the king. There was another person that we began to find out about that rose to power and is in the inner courts now of the king. His name is Haman. And as we talked a little bit about last week, he's called the Agagite. This is a reference to King Agag, who was a king of a nomadic tribe, as we briefly said last week, who was historically, as the very young nation of Israel, as they came into the Promised Land, this nomadic tribe wreaked havoc on them, marauding, raiding all the time. They were having terrible trouble. King Saul, in fact, this is part of the outcry of this young nation that we need a king, and we need someone to provide us security and safety. This marauding tribe was one of the reasons why, and also hostile neighbors. But these were historic enemies of Israel, and Haman is of that tribe and of that people. And so we see, as Haman is rising to power, just as Esther has risen to power, Haman has this lifelong hatred for the Jewish people. And in chapter 3, we see Haman strutting on the scene. He's been elevated to power, and of course, this is a shame and honor culture. This is when you rise to power, people are supposed to serve you and pay homage to you. And so Haman finds himself now close to the king and one of the king's officials, and he demands this kind of respect and honor and admiration from people around him. But of course, as he passes by Mordecai, who is clearly comfortable in his skin and clearly not impressed by Haman or anybody else particularly. Mordecai is a pretty wise person, as we'll see. And he's not afraid to say who he is. When Haman passes by, and maybe Mordecai knows a little bit about this person, knows a little bit about, probably is aware of who this is and where Haman came from. Mordecai does not bow to him. And, Haman is thinking, this is the kind of culture where if you're part of nobility, no matter if you're born into it or you're promoted into it, nobility back then meant not just the seat of power, but and the seat of influence, all these things, but also the seat and sort of the gateway to influence and even some sort of relation to the God of all or the gods. And so Haman is not just asking for honor and respect and things like that. Haman's asking, in a sense, for worship. As sort of an under regent, sort of he's part of the court of the gods, or the court of God, as well as being in the court of the king. And so, if you can imagine this, he is fueled by hatred. He is fueled by pride. He is fueled by position of place and his influence. He sees great opportunity, and he must exploit this. But the more and more we see Haman is out to exploit and to use the palace and all its influence for him. As we'll see, he doesn't really care a whit about the palace as such, but it's an opportunity for him. Yes, sir.
So he was. The people were told by the king to honor Haman.
Yeah, and
Haman didn't earn that
right
position. It was just here he is.
It came with it. Yeah, he's in that position. You must honor him as you would the other nobility,
Okay.
as it was the other nobility.
What would possess the king to give Haman the signet ring?
I don't know. I don't know. We'll get to that. I want to more concentrate on Esther's situation because of our time, but we'll get to that. Mordecai, in this pretty ugly exchange with Haman, says when he's questioned, and in this particular culture, if you show such boldness as to resist in any kind of way to the king and the king's retinue and all that, you're basically, in that culture, you are going against the grain of the universe, okay? And so it's a very, very terrifying thing to stand before or even to come into the presence of the king and to say something or to in any way insinuate that you are not just going with the flow of power. And Mordecai seems to be doing that. And so he's, Mordecai at this point, might be questioned, he might be arrested. And they ask him why he didn't bow to Haman. And he says he's a Jew, which is, ironic in this story so far, because Mordecai has been instructing his cousin, who he's raised as his daughter. He's been telling her, don't say anything about who you are. And as we know, Esther is very compliant. She's living large, and she's come into this great situation, and she's not saying a thing about who she is or her people. But that's soon going to change, because out of this, Haman decides he is going to do something that his people dream of doing. You can imagine this. He comes to power and he thinks, what kind of hero would I be if I could make my people's dreams come true? Okay? And what would part of the dreams of his people be? It would be to those hated Jews. What if we had an opportunity, and what if we had the signet ring, and what if we had the power to raid and plunder them? But this would be the ultimate raid. This would be the ultimate plundering. What if we could actually annihilate them at the same time? And so he hatches a plot. And he thinks about it carefully. He's very shrewd. He knows how to take advantage of his position. And so he comes in, and at a time, as we said, in the kingdom, where they were hurting a bit from a couple of failed campaigns to take over Greece and to annex Greece into the Persian Empire. They were smarting from this latest failed attempt. It didn't go well. It didn't go well for the early Darius. It's not going well for Xerxes. Any infusion of capital, any kind of sense of hope, mired down in a long campaign of all the usual things that go along with empire building and all these things. Any kind of influx of money and encouragement would be a good thing. And so Haman knows this. He knows that there's a weakness, and he exploits it. He basically goes and drafts a plan, drafts up a bill, introduces it. I'd say a bill. I'm being facetious. He drafts a bill, an edict, and he just says, "Look, we've got a people within this empire. Remember, the empire stretches from India all the way down to, the Gulf, the Gulf, Persia, even down to the North Africa, for crying out loud." Haman says, "Well, there's a people, by the way, in this kingdom they're basically squatting here, and they're basically draining the treasury. The net result of them being here is that we're having to pay for them. And I have a plan." He said, "In fact, what I'll do is I can guarantee the king 10,000 talents of silver?"
What's a talent worth?
Back then,
Not that it matters.
we can look at it. 10,000 talents. A talent was about, they're just using the weight. That's 75 pounds. So 10,000 times 75, that's how many pounds of silver. That can give you an idea that it's a lot. It's a lot.
Many
Silver
camels.
was that.
Yes. I want to put that down as part of the...
They controlled a lot of wealth then.
I'm writing this down. 10,000 talents of silver. Plot. All these kind of things. 10,000. He says to annihilate all the Jews, and he's got a set day on a set month, the 13th, the 12th month, 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar. And what this does is this decree would go out all over the empire, and on this day and at this certain time, at this point, anyone that knows of any Jew or any Jewish family or anything is allowed to plunder, take their property, basically take everything they have, and kill them. And the king, whatever. The king signs it. And then, of course, the laws of the Medes and the Persians, whatever is written, must be done. It cannot be rescinded. It is hard fact law. It must be done. Mordecai is near the gate of the palace, and he hears about this plot. And he sends word to Esther. Now, and here's chapter 4, and we're going to stay in chapter 4 today. We could stay in chapter 4 a couple of days. But Mordecai learns of this. He tears his clothes. He puts on sackcloth and ashes. He goes in the midst of the city, cries out with a bitter cry. And he goes to the entrance of the king's gate. He went up, for no one was allowed to enter the king's gate so clothed in sackcloth. And in every province, whenever the king's command and his decree reached, there was great mourning among the Jews, fasting, weeping, lamenting. And so this is going out. This is happening in many people, and you've got to imagine too that many in the kingdom that know these people and are friends and know them just like you'd know people in the city. There'd be great mourning and great worry coming on in the province. And so Esther notices this. People are noticing something that's going on, and so they come to tell her. She sends garments to clothe Mordecai that he might take off his sackcloth. I mean, can you see what's happening here? Esther's beginning to think, oh my gosh, I've gotten here, I'm here by the skin of my teeth. I'm Jewish. Mordecai, tone this down. I mean, there's a lot going good here, and a lot could happen. And she's can you imagine? She's terrified too. But Mordecai refuses, and he's going to do this, and he continues. And so he ends up getting word to her about this plot. She doesn't know what's happening at this point, but she gets word of this plot from Mordecai. And I'm moving on quickly. And Mordecai's basically telling Esther, you have to do something. In other words, you have to take the capital that you have amassed in coming to the center of power. You are now queen. You've got to take this capital that you have, and you've got to risk it. You have got to do something. You are in this position of power, and only you can do something at this point. And Esther ponders this. We can't, we keep going, in this and looking at this. But I want you to imagine this young girl. She's there by her beauty. She's there by her looks. She's there by the way that she pleases the king. She has risen to the seat of power in Persia. She's Jewish. And up to now, she has hidden this. She goes along, she's not bold. And she knows that the last queen, think about this, was banished because of that queen's boldness and her willingness to stand up to the king. And so imagine her world is turned upside down and sideways. I don't know what you and I would do. And I'm sure she's thinking of all kinds of things. How can we, maybe if I can just control Mordecai, maybe this thing will pass. Maybe if, I stay before the king. But then she thinks, well, wait a minute. He hasn't called me. And he says, she tells this plainly to Mordecai. She sends word back. She says, look, it's been 30 days. I've not been called to come to the king for 30 days. And there's a law that if a man or woman goes to the king inside the inner court without being called, there is but one law to be put to death, except the one to whom the king holds out the golden scepter so that he may live. So she's thinking, you don't know what you're asking me. And Mordecai basically sends back to her, and he basically tells her a couple of things. He does understand. And he says this. He says, Esther, I want you to, as long as you're calculating all the moves, as long as you're trying to figure out where you are, let me tell you. He's basically saying, you've come to the palace. And it says the Hebrew, anytime it says you've come to the palace, the Hebrew tense is a passive tense. So it's basically, a way to say it maybe even better in our language would be, you've been brought to the palace. And he says, if you risk basically giving up your place in the palace, you might lose it. He said, but I want to tell you that this is going to happen, and either way, you're going to lose this palace, even if you want to stay, because either the Jews will be annihilated, and if that edict goes into effect, they will be killed, and it won't be long, but you're going to be found out, and you'll be killed too. But even if not, even if somehow that something happens from some other place, and I don't know what could happen, but God can do something to make that the Jews might be delivered. But even if they're delivered, you're still going to be found out. You're still going to be found out for who you are, and you're going to be a traitor in the palace. You're going to be fingered in this. He says, so a greater even decision that you have to make is the calling on you, because basically you've been brought to the palace for, and he says, in that wonderful phrase, for such a time as this. And he says it, who knows? He basically gives her a terrible assessment of the situation. It's a pretty, rubber meets the road kind of awful assessment. He says, you're not going to survive this either way, unless you risk. But he also says, there's this sense of hope. There's something bigger than Esther and Mordecai is afoot here. And he's saying, who knows? But maybe you have been brought to the palace. Suggestion: Esther, you've come here by grace. It's basically sheer grace. You didn't ask to be queen. You didn't. The beauty that you have, the stunning beauty, your appearance, it was given to you. You didn't ask to be born this way. You didn't ask to be born of these people, but you are. And you've been brought into, out of sheer grace, you have risen to a place of power. Esther, there's a reason. There's a reason, and it's good to risk. But it is risk. Count the cost. It's going to cost you. And he's basically saying this as well. He says, if you don't do anything, basically what this means is that the palace owns you. And isn't that the risk that anybody takes on when they are brought into a position of power and influence? And I mean, look at St. John's. St. John's has had a wonderful history in Florence, and people pass through these doors and have come here and pray here, and been part of the community here. People have leaders, people who have great influence in Florence, and still do come through to St. John's. In a sense, if you're part of St. John's, you're pretty near to the palace. And I don't mean it's not like St. John's is some palace, but I'm saying the influence and power in this town. You and I are pretty close to the palace. And what Mordecai knows about Esther is that so far she's been very compliant. She's done everything right, and she's wonderfully been given this prominent position. But at some point, that prominent position is going to more and more own her. It's like she's the tail and the palace is the dog, and the palace is wagging her. And she's going to be, and he's basically saying, you're going to be eaten alive. The palace is going to have you, and at some point, the palace is going to devour you. So, Esther, you may think you're in a position where you can maybe ride this out and at least be delivered in a sense, but you aren't. You're being devoured. You're in great danger in the palace. The position that you're in is greatly dangerous. It's terribly dangerous. And you need to make a decision. And what you need to do is risk losing it all. Because what we need is someone to mediate for us. We need a mediator. And guess what, Esther? It looks like it's you. And so what does Esther do? What does meek, mild, wonderful, wonderful Esther start to do? It's really, it's pretty cool in this one chapter. He says, who knows whether you have been brought to the kingdom for such a time as this? Esther starts to give orders. This is the first time we see this. Not bold Esther, meek, mild, get along with, under the radar Esther. She's not that way. She decides. She moves. She realizes that she's there by grace. She begins to see the picture. She begins to act on just this vague sense that she's going to be delivered and her people, and that there's grace involved and there's mercy involved, and if she risks, and if she is herself, and if she knows who she is, and if she identifies with her people, and she responds to this grace and mercy, then things can happen that she can't even imagine. And so she decides to risk. And so she starts giving orders. She says, gather all the Jews to be found in Susa. Hold a fast on my behalf. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my young women will also fast as you do. Then I'll go to the king, though it's against the law. And if I perish, I perish. Wow. What has Esther done? Just in the space of a few. Esther has taken this on. She's done two great things. She's taken on identification. In other words, she identifies with her people. She knows that who she is at her core is not the queen of Persia, but that she's a Jew, and that she has to answer to another king, a greater king. Okay? She identifies with her people, and she becomes a mediator. Okay? And she decides, she thinks about this, and as you know, as y'all were telling me about Esther, she's very smart. And she is, and we're going to see this. She's got looks, and she's got brains. And she's got a boldness that she never really knew she had. She's been fueled, she's been fueled by grace. And she's been fueled by the identification with her people, and by extension, even though it's not mentioned in here, God's not mentioned in the Book of Esther, she's being fueled by the God, the great King, not just of Persia, but of all nations. And so she says, order this fast. I will go to the king. I'm going to risk losing everything. I'm going to throw away the palace, because at the end of the day, I'm not a function of the palace. I'm not absorbed into being the queen. I have all these things, but I have it on loan. It's not really mine. It's been loaned to me for a purpose, and I'm here to serve. I'm going to serve. I am not going to feather my nest, and I'm not going to seek my total identity within the palace. I'm going to do something. So she gives orders. Now, interestingly, chapter 5, and where are we? Oh my gosh, the time. Oh gosh, we need so much time.
What's the significance of the 3 days?
Well, I love that, isn't it? Well, it doesn't say, does it? She just says we're going to have a 3-day fast. And I love how that chapter starts. On the 3rd day. Let's put that down. There are all kind of little things. The little thing. I mean, the forest for the trees, but then the trees are pretty cool in this.
I mean, the 3 goes throughout the Bible. Is this the first reference where we've had just 3?
It's not I don't know if it's the absolute first reference. I know that they're referenced in the prophets, but they came probably after, or no, they came earlier. The prophets, some of the early prophets talked about the 3rd day. Hosea talked about this, and it was. We'll look at that reference. Let's look at it real quick, because that's worth looking at. Hosea is right before Joel and Amos. I think it's 6:2. Yeah, this is one of the prophecies of Hosea. Come, let us return to the Lord, for He has torn us that He may heal us. He has struck us down; He will bind us up. After 2 days He will revive us. On the 3rd day He will raise us up. Okay. So there are references all the way through the Hebrew Scriptures about the 3rd day, and it's linked to deliverance. And it's certainly linked here. This is an incredible time in Israel's history of deliverance. The 3rd day, Esther puts on her royal robes, and she stands in the inner court of the king's palace, in front of the king's quarters, while the king was sitting on his royal throne, inside the throne room, opposite the entrance to the palace. A lot of detail there, but it's telling you. Can you imagine the courage? She's basically facing a death sentence. Remember that the only reason she got there, and she knows this, the only reason she has these royal robes to put on is because the prior queen was very bold and got herself banished. So, if you can imagine this robed beauty, basically, I think of that. I'm thinking right now. Of course, I go all kind of weird places, but I'm thinking of that, Braveheart when Wallace comes in on the horse and he's, at this point you don't know that he has a weapon, but he's coming in as if he's completely defenseless. But she really is. She's better than Braveheart. She's better than William Wallace here. She's literally coming in without weapons. Okay, and she's basically coming in, and she knows at any moment she could be taken away and hung. At the very least, banished. But the king would have to put her to death if he doesn't extend the golden scepter.
Does he physically have to do it?
He doesn't physically have to do it. He could, but he would order it to be done. But she wins favor. She risks it all, and he extends the scepter. And he says, "What will you? I will give you anything up to half of my kingdom, queen." And so now get this. The queen is now telling the king what to do. Gotta love it. Gotta love it. He says, "I want to prepare a feast for you and for Haman today. Come quickly." Now imagine this. Haman gets word. You're invited. Pretty exclusive feast. It's all for you, and it's all for Esther, and it's all for Xerxes. Imagine Haman. He's thinking, wow, this is just, Persia's opened up to me. This is getting better and better. Could it get more wonderful? No, look what's going to happen to me. And so he's there. They have a feast. And what happens is, right at that point, the king asks her again, well, what do you want me to do for you? And she's hanging back. She's not showing her hand. She's saying, no. I'm biding my time. I really, basically she's thinking, I really want the king to be in a great mood. I really want the king to feel so good and just that he'll just be willing to do anything. I just want him to feel his best. She says, I've got another feast tomorrow. Come to that one. You and Haman. Just you. And we'll talk a little bit more, and I'll do whatever you say. I'm going to ask you, just trust me on this one. And so they go, okay. And Haman goes away, and he's thinking, and it's very revealing what Haman thinks. He goes away. He sees Mordecai again. Mordecai, all the other people are like before Haman, and Mordecai just stands there. And Haman looks at him and just says, I'm biding my time. I'm biding my time. If I could do this tomorrow, but it's going to play out. Just you're going to get yours. And so he keeps going, and he starts to think about the splendor of his riches, the number of his sons, all the promotions with which the king had honored him, and how he advanced him above the officials and the servants of the king. Haman said, even Queen Esther, let no one but me come with the king to the feast she's prepared. And tomorrow also I'm invited by her together with the king. Yet all this is worth nothing to me as long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. And so the delicious, he's just waiting. Nothing's, what is it? Revenge. It's best when it's served up cold. Is that what it? Something like that. And he's just thinking how delicious this is going to be. This is just going to be so wonderful. And and in his feeling full of himself, he gets together with his friends and they say, let's build a gallows really high. This is not going to be just a little kind of off the side execution. This is going to be a glorious execution. This is going to just the beginning of a bloodbath, and I can't wait. And everybody's going to look at me as the person who made this happen, and it's going to be glorious. I'm revel in this. And so that's where we leave Haman. And Esther is just, she's put out the bait and she's reeling slowly. But there's still great risk. I mean, she doesn't know how this is going to go. But that's what's happening. Now, it's interesting that a person that does a commentary on Esther, and I can't remember the actual number, but it says that in the Book of Esther, I think she's called Queen Esther 13 times. And I'll get this right for next week because I didn't think about it. I should have checked my notes. She's called Queen Esther something like 13 times. But 11 of those times come at this moment when she goes when she decides that if I perish, I perish. And so the majority of the times that she's called queen was when she risked everything to lose it. This thing, just on face value, this is an amazing story. It's just amazing. But there's a lot of stuff that will come out of it. Some of the best is yet to come in the next couple of chapters when you see how this unwinds for Haman and how it unwinds for Mordecai and how it unwinds for Esther. I don't want to go there. I mean, I do. I'm just chomping at the bit to get there. But I'm not going to do it.
We'll be here all afternoon.
No, we'll be here all afternoon. We're not going to do that. But what I want you to begin to see as we begin to put this all together, and we will do that. We have a palace. We have a king. We have a king who basically rewards beauty and promotes beauty and basically puts people through. They give up their lives to earn this beauty and to desperately try for it. And only then, if they're worthy enough, will he maybe be their husband. And we have a young girl who has a lot going for her, but she's very mild, and she is not bold, and she does not take action. She hides. But when she begins to find out about incredible plot going on for the destruction of her people, great sums of money, silver is being thrown, she stands up and she's willing to risk losing the palace because she is who she is. And the third day there'll be deliverance. What I want to begin to get across is if that you and I look at this like we look at the book of Daniel, look at the heroes in the Bible, and we'd say, well, the whole point is to be like them. You know, be an Esther. Dare to be a Daniel. I mean, that gets a lot of, that's a lot of what people in teaching say about this thing. I want you to see Esther not as an example so much as I want you to see her as a sign. And what do I mean by that? A sign is something that doesn't point to itself but points to something else. And as we gather all this data about Esther, I think that it's going to point somewhere to somewhere else. And we'll find out what that is in a little bit. I can show my hand a little bit on this. We are honoring in the next little while in Advent, we're honoring a young woman, a young Jewish woman that was thrust into the light, didn't earn it, didn't deserve it, was asked to risk everything. And she and her husband did risk everything for a king. But we'll talk about that a little bit more next week, and as this whole thing unwinds. As delicious as Haman is thinking about how all this is going to happen, it's even better when you see what happens. Okay. We'll get there next week.